today's high-intensity tech training. It's a look at the cutting-edge world of autonomous agents in CX technology. These intelligent systems are revolutionizing customer interactions, delivering hyper-personalized experiences and supercharging revenue streams. Your clients simply cannot afford to ignore these strategies, and today is your opportunity to gain the insights needed to be able to help them. We're joined today by Telarus VP of CX and host of the wildly popular Minute Snippet feature, available on LinkedIn and wherever you get your snippets. Sam, welcome back to the Tuesday call. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing, Doug?
I'm doing well, thanks. Great to have you here.
Great to be here as always. Right on. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Let me just first off share what I've got going on and we will get things started. Okay, cool. So let's make sure though that the technology is in fact working. Do, 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 do. Slide, slide, slide. Computer. Hold on one second. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. All right. So first things first, Doug, can you see my screen with the Agents of Change title on here? I just want to make sure everything's working.
Absolutely, it looks terrific.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So as Doug had mentioned, today we're going to talk about autonomous agents, officially called Agents of Change, really how autonomous agents are revolutionizing CX. So I'm so glad that you're all here with me today to join this session. This is going to be pretty interesting, and I am looking at the chat. So if you have anything pop up, anything come to mind, do let me know, and we will go ahead and hop into it. So first things first, okay? Let's look at these primary outcomes sought in adopting AI to accelerate the business. Okay, so I'm going to do kind of like the weather person thing here. So I'm going to step aside. But when we look at just the primary outcomes, again, sought by these businesses, the primary reason is actually, well, productivity, right? And when you look at just some of these other different outcomes, you'll notice that headcount reduction, which is typically something that humans are very worried about, right? Like, oh, robots are going to take my job, things like that. That's actually not a primary. It's actually one of the least common outcomes that companies are looking to solve for. It's not really about headcount reduction right now. It's really more about helping everybody become more and more productive. Okay. And then next, of course, comes like improved CX. You've got the automation, the innovation, right? Like just the ability to say, oh, we use AI internally at our business, right? Modernization, cost reduction, all that good stuff. So what I want to focus on really is up here in the productivity and improved customer experience components of the businesses. So let's go right into it, right? Okay, what exactly is an autonomous agent? And it's not what you think. So when you think of agent, sometimes a lot of us think of, well, it's people, right? Agents are usually people. They're sitting in some kind of location. Maybe they're answering phones or chats or what have you. Well, now you have to consider in the context of artificial intelligence that the term agent is actually something completely different. And what makes it autonomous is really this, right? It's this, as it says, this sophisticated AI-driven system that ultimately performs tasks, but it does so independently, right? And there are so many different ways that it does this. So think of again, it's a system, right? Not necessarily a human, but it's using these different advanced algorithms to learn from data, and then it improves its actions, its knowledge over time. All right. So again, when you think of the word agent, don't think of it as a person. It's a system, right? That can augment a particular process. Okay. Now, let me give you some examples. All right. There are many different kinds of agents. So just again, to harp on the fact that it's not necessarily humans. So I have one of these. Again, we're going to go into story time a little bit, just a little more memorable that way. But I have one of these. It's the Roomba. So this is one we call a goal-based agent, right? I turn it on and it's responsible for sweeping, vacuuming the floor. I know there are other mops out there that do other things, like also the vacuum and mop at the same time. But the general kind of Roomba that we've seen over the last few years or so, I mean, I think it's a decade now, right? But what it's able to do is actually combine things like foresight and strategic planning. Right? Funny. You think a robot, this little robot vacuum does all these things, but it does. Foresight or strategic planning to actually navigate towards specific outcomes that you tell it. So in like the Roomba app, for example, I can say, okay, do a survey of my downstairs, and it will literally survey all of the vacuumable areas around the dog beds, around the couches, the tables, etc. And it says, okay, here's the area. What do you want me to do? And if I say vacuum all of it, it goes ahead and works its way around, vacuums everything, returns to home base, and empties out all the stuff, right? So that's goal-based agents. I give it a goal and it executes, all right? Another one is called model-based reflex agents, right? So this is really neat. I know our CEO is a big fan of this company as well, but basically what it does is it's making decisions about potential unseen parts of the environment. In fact, it's smart enough to actually anticipate future conditions. And so one example of this is Waymo, right? These are the self-driving vehicles that you get into, and it drives you around just as if it were a normal person. The other day, I drove into San Francisco for an event. I saw a big pod of these coming down one of the main streets of San Francisco. And then they all, it was kind of creepy, but they all kind of just dispersed from a pod. Now I thought, okay, that's a little odd. And I drove up to one and I looked inside and there were no humans in it, right? You can just imagine my surprise. But what's even more interesting is the interaction that happened afterwards. I was behind one of these guys, right? And actually, before I even looked inside it, and an ambulance was coming up behind me. And I'm thinking, San Francisco, really crowded. How is this going to work? I hope the person in front of me, this Waymo, moves, right? And sure enough, it turned on its signal to move off to the right. It moved off to the right in an open spot. I did as well. The ambulance went by. As soon as it went by, the car in front of me turns on the blinker to go left, and it comes back onto the road and proceeds. And then that's that moment when I drove up to it and looked and thought, holy cow, there is no human in there, right? So it is now smart enough not only to detect sort of what routes to take based on, say, traffic, but it's smart enough to know how to react in, again, these unseen parts of the environment. What if XYZ happens? What do I do? And it's smart enough to make those decisions, okay? So that's a model-based reflex kind of agent. Another one that we probably interact with every day is the learning agent, right? And these are ones that can, it says here, like adapt, improve over time based on your experience. And it essentially kind of evolves its own behaviors and strategies. So I guarantee that, like, let's take this example. If I were to log into your Netflix account and you were to log into my Netflix account, they would look very, very different because we have different preferences. And an application such as a Netflix is going to constantly change what the recommendations are based on your likes, right? And so when we take that into account, these particular agents, really it's the platform that's learning and then providing you with the content that you may not potentially like, right? So another one, okay, virtual assistants, virtual agents. This is one that we, again, are most commonly involved with. So when we look at like using Siri, you're on your Android and whatever that one is, right? Or any, say, advanced voice mode, for example, as well with ChatGPT. And Frank, I do see your note in there. We will talk about contact center examples in a moment. But yes, virtual assistants, virtual agents, you can now simply talk into the phone, right? And it will go ahead and move you on to, whatever, help you out with whatever you need there with regard to just using your voice and it completing actions based on that. The unique part of this, you're thinking, okay, well, if I just say, hey, do this, it'll do that. Really easy, right? Wrong. It's actually taking into account how you say things, and it's further building on what you say, right? So not only do you want an action, but it's going to start trying to figure out what else you want to do after that action. In other words, predictive AI as well, right? So technically, how does this work? Okay, I've covered this with you before, but let's just revisit this, that these different technologies in this agent world, right, is really leveraging two branches of AI. One, it's machine learning. Two, it's NLP, or natural language processing. So what do these things mean? Well, the machine learning component is basically just ingesting large volumes of data, right? Whether that's conversations, it's finding patterns in that data. It's also, like I mentioned, making predictions. But from the NLP perspective, it gets a little more granular, right? Where it's actually taking like these mathematical relationships between words and phrases. Think of like beautiful mind stuff, right? You're just drawing lines from different words and code and what have you, right? But the reason for all that is because it's actually trying to detect the how or the why, right? Your intent, your sentiment. If I call into a contact center and I say to the IVA, to the virtual agent, I say, I just want to pay my bill, versus I just want to pay my bill. Okay? I said the same exact thing, but I said it completely differently. And so, for example, here you go, Frank, a contact center example, the person, first version of me, might just route me to the payment system, right? No problem. Automated payment system. The second version of me may actually route to a customer service agent who specializes in retention, because the system sensed that there was some kind of strain or maybe some kind of negative sentiment there, and they want people to thanks, Scott. They want people to work on me from a loyalty perspective, because maybe Sam's not happy. She's not happy with the service, and we want to make sure that she is happy. So providing more of that white glove service, right? So just another example there. Okay, let's head into the use case, right? And good point, Asim, NLU, NLP, natural language understanding, processing, like you name it, lots of different flavors out there. But for the sake of this, we're going to keep it super simple. So use case number one in CX, right, is overall enhancing your customer interactions. So in the term of AA here, we're referencing autonomous agents. Believe it or not, it's actually transforming customer service efficiency. No surprise there. We talked about productivity, right? Efficiency does tie into that quite a bit, because these autonomous agents can actually handle now up to an average of 80% of inquiries. And that's taken across the board, across several companies today. But here's exactly how they're doing it, right? Let me dive into this. When we look at response times, how long does it take a human to get back to someone versus an autonomous agent, right? That can also answer the question. So let's say a company has a knowledge base full of how-to documents, right? An autonomous agent can leverage that particular knowledge base of information and provide those answers directly to the customer really, really quickly. When we look at personalized experiences, maybe my particular profile calling into a business or interacting with a business is going to look very different than if you were to talk to a business, whether that's a customer service line or even the sales line, right? Example here. Let's say I am inquiring about a t-shirt that I really like. And what it's going to do is, or a t-shirt that I ordered, it's going to recommend maybe a pair of shoes that go well with that shirt. But that's also based on the different kinds of shoes that I purchased in the past and what colors of those shoes I also preferred, right? So you could see just how detailed and how targeted so many businesses can get around personalizing your particular experience. Again, just like our Netflixes and how they're different, mine's going to look very different than yours. Another one is around proactive support. Okay, so think of a company, let's say a bank. Let's say they don't have autonomous agents whatsoever, right? when we think about proactive support versus reactive, right? So say, for example, I call in and I'm calling in about fraud on my account, and I work through the IVR, I work through the menu, and finally I get to a person, right? But like proactive might be something like someone calls me, hey, Sam, I noticed this fraud on your account. What do you want to do about this? Was this you, right? We get that via text, we get that via email, we can get it via phone call, whatever my preference is. And also, like, if you think about it, we want our stuff handled. In other words, when I call in about a balance inquiry or I interact with my banking app about a balance inquiry, no problem, right? But as a consumer, if there's fraud on my account, like I want someone to handle that, and I want someone to handle that like yesterday, right? Like I want those funds readily available again. I want a confirmation number, all those things. And so essentially what autonomous agents can do as well is really free up a lot of those humans, like actual humans, to deal with more complex issues that are going to lead to overall increased customer satisfaction, right? So just one example. Okay, another example. So we talked about personalization, but this is a much bigger use case than I think a lot of people realize. And so when we look at how autonomous agents are using data, okay, this is really, really important. There's so much data out there. And so what it's doing is it's able to not only analyze, but apply different customizations to a particular client based on those clients' behaviors as well as preferences, right? And how is it doing that? Well, just talked about that, the underlying technology, ML, NLU, NLP, right? But also the amount of data. There's a lot of data out there. In fact, we're going to talk about some challenges in this session around autonomous agents and implementing those in companies today. But when we look at customization, personalization, it's not just about support. It's also about sales, right? So again, back to my t-shirt example. I order a t-shirt. I'm going to start getting some notifications about pants or maybe shoes that match the t-shirt or that go with the look, right? And so from a lead gen standpoint, autonomous agents can actually help from a data consolidation standpoint, but also turning all of that into a consumable and preferred communication strategy for individual customers. Think about that for a moment. I know I just said a lot in just one sentence, right? I promise it's not a run-on sentence. But it's taking all of the data, not just about me, but also data from other people like me. And it's going to start testing me with all of those different suggestions, right? So it's a lot bigger picture, bigger story than what we see on the surface as consumer, right? So there's that use case. Okay, third use case, we talked about productivity being the number one goal in implementing AI, right? So as we predict, autonomous agents, what they do is they automate all of those routine interactions. In fact, they can do it 24/7. They don't need breaks. There are no really, say, compliance issues around, taking lunches, time off, PTO, what have you. Yeah, there's no breaks or overtime pay, right? So let's say, the stat is an interesting stat I pulled, but like the daily increase in contact center agent productivity is 1.2 hours. And that's very, very significant. Again, helping make these human people more productive, right? And so the productivity goes through the roof with autonomous agents. Use case number 4, scalability. Okay, so we think, all right, we're talking to a person, that's a one-to-one conversation, right? We're talking to a human one-to-one. But if we're thinking about autonomous agents, they can handle thousands, right? Thousands of simultaneous interactions at any given time. So for the company, it actually helps them maintain really high service levels or SLAs, right? How do they do this? Well, there's no limitation to it, right? It's all tech. And so there's this 30% overall reduction in need for human resources during busy periods. And good point, Wes, the 1.2 hours of increased productivity, that is on a daily basis. Daily basis. Thank you. I left that one out. But yeah, when we look at the reduction in need for human resources during those busy periods, from a scheduling perspective, it definitely helps with that component, right? Where autonomous agents can take on a lot of that stuff. And so you're like, this is great. AI is awesome, right? All of my customers need autonomous agents, or they need some form of agent or AI or what have you. With something as big as AI right now, there are several challenges to consider. And so as you have the AI discussion with customers, this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? Is you have to look at potentially what roadblocks you're going to see. And the value here is I'm going to share what we are seeing the most when it comes to implementing something like artificial intelligence in whatever capacity, right? But AI into businesses these days. The number one challenge that we are seeing in almost every single opportunity is the data, okay? So we come across a lot of data silos, and this occurs especially in larger organizations when you've got multiple departments using multiple systems, right? Whether that was due to an acquisition or, they just kind of do the shadow IT thing where one department says, oh, we're using this, by the way, we're using this, surprise, right? And keeping that data separate is really easy to happen. Now, the other thing is data cleanliness. A lot of the data out there floating around can be extremely inaccurate. And we see that pretty much in every business, right? Like not everybody's phone number is correct, or email, or maybe there's multiple profiles for people, right? And so like, what do you do? How do you kind of approach this conversation with customers? And you have to start with this conversation of, hey, like, what does your data hygiene look like, right? And you have to talk about like potential data integration tools that might be required, because the AI at the end of the day is only good as the data that you give it. Okay, again, AI is only good as the data that you give it. And so if the data is not clean, you won't get clean AI results, right? Or usage. So the data integration component is key when we look at making sure that all that data is talking to each other and also accurate in all the systems. Another one, setting up really strong data governance policies. Okay, so this is where we talk about, how and what kind of data are people putting in, even all the way down to like the nomenclature of the data, right? Things of that nature. And so what I would encourage you to do, if you're not too familiar with the data conversation, is you have to talk to our cloud and our cybersecurity guys. You got to talk to Kobe Phillips, you got to talk to Jason Stein, as well as our supporting solution architects, as well as solution engineers, because these are the ones who are going to have the conversation around the data, okay? All right, challenge number 2, maintaining the human touch. The reality is humans are not going away. They are not going away. When we look at the empathy, the creativity that we have as humans, and then we can still handle like complex skills, right? Things like negotiations, sensitive complaints, emotionally charged situations. So for example, on the weekends, because I guess work is not enough. No, I'm joking. On the weekends, since COVID, actually, I am a volunteer for 988, which is the official suicide and crisis hotline. And every time I take a call, literally in my mind, at the end of that call, I think, thank goodness a robot or artificial intelligence did not take that call, because there are so many situations in where you have to be able to pivot when you're trying to talk somebody off a ledge, right? You have to. And just having that empathy from a human standpoint is really, really important. So just know I've been there. I'm in that contact center every weekend for 4 hours. But it's already an emotionally charged situation just being on that line, not just, of course, someone calling in, but from a human agent perspective. And that, yes, we can benefit from AI making suggestions on what to say next. But the reality is it will never know that, it will never be able to say the right things to the right people and understand personality within the first 2 to 4 minutes where you have the impact to change someone's life, right? So that's challenge number two. To kind of sum everything up, the future is bright. And I have to say that future is bright and autonomous, right? It's a really, really exciting opportunity. So kind of what do you do next, right? What I'd recommend is like get to know AI. Get to know exactly how AI fits though in across several suppliers. So just about every supplier we have in the portfolio has a different flavor of artificial intelligence. And yes, like we can certainly help with figuring out what paths to take based on the conversations that you have with customers. But just for your own general knowledge, like just get to know, okay, they do this flavor of AI or that. Understand the use cases so that you can educate clients in number two, just about how they can leverage this concept of autonomous agents to enhance just the overall stack. And then last but not least, like leverage this AI adoption roadmap that we've built to start your conversation. So probably like, how do I get there? Here is the QR code. But if you don't snap it ahead of time or maybe you're listening from your mobile, no big deal. We will send you the resource immediately afterwards. And that way you can get it in your hands. And then last but certainly not least, we've got all of our supporting stuff in Talaris University. So if you haven't taken our CX track, our AI track, start there. And we'll actually be releasing a lot more content in the new year. So look forward to starting that up. And if you don't have access to it, just head over to your email admin at if you have any issues there, and let's get you in. And that way you can get started on selling more CX as well as having that AI conversation with your customers. So that's all I've got, Doug. I know we're going to get loaded with questions. I can already see so many popping in, but hopefully that was helpful.
Sam Nelson is here, everybody's favorite, today discussing autonomous agents and how they're revolutionizing CX and pretty soon most of the other industries as well. We do have a lot of questions that have come in. You've taken a few of the main ones so far. Let's go back and talk about data for just a second. And this is my own question I want to throw in before we handle the other ones that are there. I'm really concerned about data because internally and at every company we focus on the cleanliness of data, the accuracy of data. And I always worry about if there are data which enter into the system which are incorrect or bad or in some other way negative, and they persist either because they weren't caught, they weren't cleansed, whatever it may be. How does a company go about then trying to reverse engineer those out and restore the database to what it needs to be? It seems to be a huge concern.
It is a huge concern because if you think of like just humans in general, how much hours we have in the day, and imagine having to go in to the data sets and modify that manually, that's just a real pain, right? And there are, I mean, that millions, probably billions of components of data out there. How does a company, I think is what you're digging at, how does a company kind of deal with the fact that, yeah, data hygiene may not be the best? So when we look at autonomous agents, there are AI capabilities out there that will literally help kind of scrape and clean up that data. And that's where we go into more of like the cloud infrastructure technology, even like the cybersecurity technology of creating those parameters around what can and cannot be done and what data is protected versus what is not. When we look at data cleanliness, you have to look at not just the accuracy, but also how it's protected, how it's transported, all of those good things, in addition to how it's actually input. So the good news, Doug, is that there are solutions out there that will actually help with the data cleanliness component, whether that's going back into it and fixing what was already done, or figuring out what the process is moving forward.
It's a good thing because regardless of what Netflix says, I did not watch those 27 Hallmark Christmas movies. I didn't.
Okay, you can
Harry
be
Barnes has a
honest.
great question that I wanted to bring up. He makes a great point here. Often when we talk about AI, we get concerned about replacing people, and you did a great job of addressing that. He makes the statement here that it's often about turning three people into four, and I loved that analogy in terms of maximizing efficiency and scalability and so forth. He asks a great question though. What sort of advantages are now available and will soon be available to more of the small business, the SMB customers, in really meaningful ways? How can they best use it now and in the future? Many of our partners and advisors are working with those clients.
Yes, it's a great point. And I get this question all the time is like, hey, I work with a very small business. How can they leverage something like artificial intelligence? Just generally, right? Because a lot of, I think, the AI solutions that we've seen mainstream are really for enterprises. The good news is that this question is growing in popularity. And so that's actually why I encourage all of everyone here, TAs, everybody, to look into exactly how each supplier applies AI into their solutions. Because even a lot of those players who participate in SMB conversations and opportunities now have AI components that you may or may not know about, right? So that's step one. Step two, however, I'm probably doing an overshare here, and yes, this is being recorded, so here we go. But we are here at Solaris looking more and more into how to give customers paths, safe paths to leveraging large language models, right? And not just for enterprises, but especially for SMB, ones that are looking to establish baselines within the industry to figure out how they grow, right? All that data is out there, how it's being done. SMBs can now leverage that data to improve their own processes to help establish baselines there to be more successful and grow. So there are quite a few things, but long story short, start with each supplier that you work with, figure out what AI components they have, and then leverage those for immediate return.
Tom Troiano's got a great question on here about ETL tools. These are the extract, transform, load tools that automate data movement to various destinations. He's asking, would you tend to include those tools as part of a total data integration process? And what sort of questions should we be asking around that?
Yeah, I think the question, well, okay, let me start with the first answer, which is I think you would have to, but it also depends on like the scope of the project, right? The size of the project. Is it an easy lift or is it like, are we talking enterprise where this is something that they're used to using, they have to use, but it's part of the bigger scope of the project, right? Where you absolutely have to say, okay, here's the end goal and here's exactly how you're going to leverage something like AI here, and then work your way backwards. And more likely than not, you're going to find out, we got to start with the data before we can get there, right? So the first question really is around data cleanliness, right? How are you managing your data today? Things of that nature to get to that conversation, and then incorporating the tools you need to get to the end goal, right? So you're like going backwards in order to go forwards a little bit.
One more question. Les McKenzie is asking if there is a way to use a white labeled AI and package that with other services for our clients. What sort of resources do we have to try and build those together?
Yeah. So we've got a lot of resources, right? In terms of white labeling AI, I mean, we have to kind of look at what the use case is. And I think that we start to jump to a lot of capabilities and functionality before we figure out what the end goal is. So if you are in fact looking, creating an option to white label AI to package with your particular services, most likely possible, right? We have to look on a supplier basis, supplier by supplier basis. But again, you have to start with the end goal and then figure out, okay, working our way backwards. How do the mechanics work? Logistically, how does this work out on paper? And we can certainly take that one offline too. That's a great question.
Really enjoyed it. We are out of time. I got to run. I wish we had another hour, but last word to you, Sam.
No, thank you. I appreciate the time, everyone. I'm seeing a lot of great questions in here. I'll respond here and there. Feel free to hit me up, but you will absolutely get some stuff from me. AI readiness, don't forget. And as always, me and my team are here to help with any CX and AI opportunities. I'm really looking forward to working with everyone.
Phenomenal presentation. Always interesting, always a great time. Sam Nelson, thanks so much for today's HIT training.